somewhat of a mixed bag when New Year's Day falls on Sunday. On the negative side, probably a few more sleepy eyes than usual out there for those who felt the need to see the new year come in. But on the positive side, it's a really good opportunity when you realize maybe I need to commit myself to the Lord or to return to my commitment to the Lord. We have a number of visitors this morning for a number of different reasons, I'm sure. But I just want to tell you, if that's part of your New Year's resolution, I thank you for that. I appreciate the fact that you're thinking along those lines. And I think that you'll find people here who are willing to help with that. People who are serious about spiritual things. And I hope that as you consider that this morning, that you'll follow through with that commitment. We want to welcome everybody today. I need to start out with a story some of you know already, but for those of you who may be a bit newer, you may not have heard me talk about this before. Several years ago, I had a friend who was the epitome of the Midas touch. He could get into any business, he could do almost anything, and it would make money. He came in one day and was telling me, I went to this antique store in Killen, Alabama. I went to this antique store, and they have a Stradivarius violin. And his eyes were about this big. And so I always liked playing the role of dream crusher and said, you realize that all of those violins are accounted for. But he wouldn't believe me. And so I finally said, well, maybe I'm mistaken about this. Maybe I don't know. And so I think the price, about $1992-ish, somewhere around in there, was $250 for this violin. And so he went back to the store, he purchased the violin, and he ended up with a $250 genuine fake Stradivarius violin. Somebody had come in and had signed it or put a sticker on it to make it appear that this violin, which I looked it up, the last one sold, I think, for about $15 million recently. It was auctioned. That he was going to get this violin for just a minimum price. And I have often thought about that story. Many times when something sounds too good to be true, I think of it. But anytime I come to the word genuine, because that word in its very connotation means that there is nothing fake about it, that you can trace it back to its original source. The etymology of the word is kind of interesting too. Oddly, the word in Latin means your knee. And so people who study those kinds of things have tried to figure out how exactly that came about. And the leading thought is that it was actually a Roman tradition that when a father had a son born to him, he would take the son, place the son on his knee, and claim legitimacy. This son belongs to me. So we take that word, genuine, which still holds a really important place for us today if we're buying an antique, if we're buying a painting, if we're buying a silver coin, whatever it might be. That word that is still so important. And we place it with another extremely important word, and we come up with this idea of genuine love. And that's an idea that the Apostle Paul talked about. In fact, Ryan just read that for us from a little bit different perspective in the translation he used. But if you look at this term in Romans 12, some translations will put it in the positive. Let love be genuine. Now, in the original language, it's just like Ryan read. It's got that negative. It is not this. So love is not hypocritical. But the idea is that this is the kind of love that you can trace back and you can find in its purity, in its genuineness, that this is what we need to be exercising toward one another. And so the passage in Romans then goes on to talk about all of these qualities that this kind of love is going to have. But this morning, I want us to focus on the idea of what it means to talk about genuine love. And just like with anything, what we have to do is to authenticate it. If you're going to buy a Stradivarius violin, you better make sure you can follow the paperwork all the way back to the guy who made the violin. And so if we take that principle and we put it with the concept of love, then what that means is we've got to be able to trace that love back to make sure that the kind of love we're being called on to show is genuine love. Now, good news for us is the fact that the Apostle John did that very thing for us. And so if you look at his short writing in 1 John, he's just going to make this point over and over again. Let's look and see what he says in chapter 4, verse 7. He says, "Beloved, let us love one another." All right, so here we begin the authentication process. "For love is from God. And whoever loves has been born of God and knows God." So, if we're going to trace it back to its source, John is saying the love that I'm calling on you to show, the love the Apostle Paul is calling on you to show, genuine love is going to find its origin in God. Now, he takes us a little further. If we look in verse 8, he goes on to say, "Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love." So however you want to describe God, whatever quality you want to say about Him, what John is saying is, what you've got to understand is that His very nature is what love is. And so important, he repeats it again in verse 16. He says, "We have come to know and to believe the love that God has for us. God is love, and whoever abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him." So you look at that, and John says, what I'm calling on you to do is to demonstrate the kind of love that God has shown from you that originates from a being whose entirety is love. You package all that together, and what John is saying is that everything about God is going to relate to love. And so you think about your Bible. Your Bible in a lot of ways is like a photo album of God. Back in the old days, before everything was digital, you'd take a photo album and you'd pull the plastic back and you'd put your picture in. And you could take that, and if your parents were really meticulous about it, you could kind of trace your childhood. Birth pictures, first birthdays, vacations. You could kind of watch yourself growing. Now, those pictures did not capture everything about you, but it captured enough where you could see yourself progressing. Well, I want you to think about the Bible in that way. The Bible does not capture everything about God. As John will also say, the earth couldn't hold all the photo albums, could it? If you tried to capture everything about God. But what he's done is he's picked out things to put in this book that we can manage, so that when we look at it, we can look at him and we can say, well, here is the God who is love being illustrated. Now, that's not always easy. I don't want to make it sound like it is. There are times when we read things about God that are challenging to us. There's things that we read that he's doing, actions that he's taking, but if we trust that there is a God and we trust that the Bible is legitimate, then what the Bible is saying is everything about it, in some way or other, is going to be motivated by love. So let's take that concept now and let's put it in the demonstration of God's love for us. So if we're looking for the origins of genuine love, we're going to look to God, we're going to see how that relates to us. But before we get to that, what we have to understand is that God's love has existed before our creation. It didn't start with us. And so we consider then the absolute necessity of the Trinity. If God is love, God is a perpetual state of love, and God is eternal, that means that God has always been showing love. And so we think about the Father, the Son, the Spirit. That idea is difficult for us, isn't it? To understand how there's three yet one. But the Bible is saying that in this three distinct forms, they are one, and what binds them together is this perfect love. Jesus spoke of that when He was on earth. And he said the Father loves the Son and has given all things into His hand, for the Father loves the Son and shows Him all that He Himself is doing. Jesus is saying this love has always been there. It's always been constant. And so what we then find is here is a God who is not going to introduce love with the creation of humanity, but rather simply find an extension of that love. And so what He's done is He's created humanity in order to be able to share that love. When you think about a teacher and a scholar, one person can be both, but not necessarily. A scholar is one who enjoys the collection of information. Scholar is one who's always got his or her nose in a book, reading, gaining all of this. A teacher is someone who says, I can't wait to take this knowledge and give it to somebody else. And so usually someone's going to know they're a teacher when they read something and the first thought is, I wonder who I can share this with. So I want you to think about that concept with God. Here is God is a being that's entirety is motivated by love, who has had this eternal, loving relationship. And He says, what I want to do is to create humans so that I can share that love with them. I believe that's our purpose in a nutshell. Why am I here? Why am I? Because God wanted to share this love with me. And so if God is wanting to share this love with me, what that's demonstrating then is that this eternal love that's been going on, God says, I want to make an addition to that. And so we return back to our chart here. And not to say that humans are the center of God's world, but to illustrate our point, we simply add humans in, and the Father loves humans, and the Son loves humans, and the Spirit loves humans, and the expectation is that love's going to be reciprocated. So just as Father, Son, and Spirit have loved, Father, Son, and Spirit love us, and we love them. That's genuine love. Now, let's take that a step further. We read this idea in John that God so loved the world. Why did God create this world? Why is it that He came up with this plan, that He developed this? Well, it was to share that love, which is going to logically lead us then to the question of what kind of being are you going to create that can share God's love? What kind of created being are you going to be able to create if you are the God of love who can share in that with you? Well, let's look at it from a negative standpoint first. It's not going to be identical to God. It's impossible. Here is God who is eternal, who is all-powerful, yet God cannot create someone who is eternal like Him. He can't replicate a God out there. So we know then that in the parameters of all of this, God cannot create someone identical to Him, yet what He can do is to create one in His image. Now most of the time in the Bible, the word image is used in a very negative sense. It's the idea that you're bowing down to something that's wood or stone, and God says it's absolutely ridiculous. Jeremiah, Isaiah both talk about that. But an image is okay when it's created by the God of heaven and it's not wood or stone, but it's someone who can share in His nature. Someone who can reason, someone who can possess those qualities that God has. And so that's you and I. First page of Genesis says, I'm going to create them in my image. They are going to have attributes and qualities like me. So we have the ability to have imagination, an ability to go out and innovate. All of these things of God, He's given us a part of that. Well, let's look at a second thing. Again, from the negative. It cannot be one who's emotionally one-dimensional. Let me illustrate that. Several years ago when my kids were little, we'd gone to the fall festival. And I had one requirement. I said, do not bring any goldfish home. So, So we got home, put them to bed, went back downstairs, and there laying on the kitchen table were 2 bags of water with goldfish flat on their side. They were not dead, though. They were there. So what am I going to do with those goldfish? I couldn't flush them. I didn't have the heart to do that. But I had an aquarium set up, and I thought, well, mistakenly, goldfish can't live in warm water. So I'll put them in the aquarium, they'll splash around a little bit, and then peacefully make their departure. 3 years later, they were still going. They're still going. And you know who it fell on to feed those fish, right? I'm the one who's feeding them. I'm the one who's cleaning out the aquarium. They never said thank you. They never gave me any kind of satisfaction. It was a very one-dimensional relationship. And it wasn't enjoyable. Right? So as God is thinking about creating, He cannot create something identical to Himself. It's an impossible thing. But He can create someone who bears some of His qualities, who is made in His image, and who has that ability to give love in return. Now that's an essential part of humanity, that we have the ability to give what we have been given. Which leads us to the third of these, and that is it cannot be one who is selfish. Now that's not to say that some of His creation have been, selfish. That's a true statement. But the very parameters of who He's going to create means it's got to be one who can appreciate what others have done. And so sometimes people will get really hard on God and they'll say, why did you create me and put me in this world where there's all these temptations and I may fall? We got to get back to the main point in our creation, that God has given this ability for us to be a part of Him, to be like Him, to love Him, and to share in that relationship with Him. Now, when God created us, it was not a selfish act. And I mean by that, we do not complete God in any way. Right? We don't complete Him. There wasn't something missing in God. God simply wanted these people who could share His love. Now, I don't think it's inappropriate to say that God does gain something from this relationship. He's got people then who can reciprocate, people with whom He can have this very pleasant and good relationship. But here's the authenticating. Here is why God created us and the kind of love with which He gave us. So you put all this together, and it simply means that we are very unique. We're above the animal world. We're above artificial intelligence or computer world, because we have the ability to make this choice, that we can participate in this grand relationship with God. So what is that going to look like? That if you're loving with a genuine love, what is that going to do to impact your life? Well, again, let's start this from 1 John 4:7. So we talked about that love is from God. But he goes on to say, whoever loves has been born of God. Really interesting here that word born in its origins looks a whole lot like the word genuine. It's coming from let me get that back here. It's coming from the same root as the word genuine. So go back to our earlier illustration. It's as if God is taking us and setting us up and saying, this is my child. I claim legitimacy. This person belongs to me. So John says, you are born of God. And then he goes further and he says, you know God. In English, we use know in two different ways. I might say, do you know the way to some city? And you say, yeah, I know that way, I'll tell you. Or I might say, tell me, do you really know this person? Maybe somebody's come to me and asked for something. And do you really know this person? And that's more than just simply facts. That's a deep down relationship. And so what John says to us is, this is love. That whoever has been declared legitimate by God. God says, you belong to me. And whoever has this intimate bond with God knows the love of God. So let's turn that around a bit now. What does non-genuine love look like? What does love that is fake look like? I tried my best to come up with a really good illustration for this. My first thought went to a senior trip I was on many, many years ago with a boy in Times Square who was intent to buy a Rolex watch. And he found one for $5. And I said, Dream Crusher, remember, you know that Rolex is not going to last long. He said, I know, but I want a Rolex watch. It didn't make it across the New York state line before it stopped. I thought about faux pearls, but I was afraid I'd get myself in trouble with somebody this morning who might be wearing them. So I came up with this illustration, and that's the fork drawer at my house. Over the years, my children had the notorious habit of throwing forks away. They had to clean the kitchen, so you can put two and two together there. And so we would go to yard sales, flea markets, wherever, and somebody would have a bundle of forks, and we'd buy them because we knew that they weren't going to last. And when the last one finally left, we upgraded because we looked and there were like 5 or 6 different patterns and they were nicked and they were cut. But you know what we call those? We call them silverware. Silverware. Now why do we do that? Well, maybe you've got silverware. Maybe you got it for your wedding, if you're old enough, you used to do that kind of thing. Maybe your grandma gave it to you, whatever. But it's genuine. I can assure you there was nothing genuine in my fork drawer. But it was silver. Because what happened is there was an inferior metal that was taken and it was coated with this little thin layer of silver. So when you looked at it, you could say, yes, it does have some genuineness to it, but not all the way through. Now take that concept and you put it to your marriage. What does non-genuine love look like in a marriage? Well, it may be okay. You know, the marriage may last. It may even be happy. But what it means is that there is love present, but it's not through and through love. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, maybe I'm unduly burdening the other person. Here's someone that maybe I'm okay in some ways and I'm doing all right in some ways, but yet there's areas that I have no desire to change that's putting the stress on the other person. And maybe an illustration of that is that maybe I'm spiritually checked out or I'm emotionally checked out. I've known a lot of good marriages where one person was a Christian, the other was not. Yet it wasn't a fully genuine marriage in the sense that every need was being met. And so I think about the relationship I have with my spouse, and I have to say, well, if my love is not genuine, if it's kind of like my fork drawer, it's got some love there, but it doesn't go all the way through, what is that doing to this person that I pledge myself to? We think about it also in churches. And maybe what that means is that we're very pleasant. We smile at each other on Sundays and we shake hands and we ask how we're doing, but yet there's no deep commitment. It's a silver plate, right? There's coating, there's some genuineness there, but yet it doesn't go through, and maybe even it gets a little worse than that. Maybe I've kind of got this grudge against somebody. Here's my brother or sister in Christ, and they made me mad about something, but the way I'm going to show them my displeasure is not to cause trouble. Well, there's a little bit of silver there, a bit of love there. But the inferior metal lies beneath that, but I'm going to hold this grudge. And I'm going to show my displeasure with cold shoulder. Or maybe it's with my neighbor. And my neighbors and I, we get along fine, but I have no real concern for their spiritual well-being, no invitations to Bible studies or gospel meetings. Well, that's what fake love looks like. It's not the absence of love, but yet it's the coding. And perhaps that goes back to our negative translation of Romans 12:9, let not your love be hypocritical. But let's turn that around now. When I'm dissatisfied with a silver-plated relationship, to get over that, what it means is I've got to be dissatisfied with a silver-plated relationship with God. You see, if love is genuine, and I really want genuine love, it's from God, because God is love, and I'm born of Him, and I know Him. And when I commit to that kind of love, what it's going to look like is this: my marriage is going to thrive. Why? It's not because it'll be problem-free. You put any two people together, you're going to have a conflict somewhere along the way. And if some couple that's been married 60 years tells you they've never had a fight, I might verify that. But what it means is the commitment states, I am going to do my very best for you. Physically, socially, emotionally, spiritually, you add it in, that everything about me is going to be for your betterment. Remember God's love for us? Did He need us? Now, we need our spouses. But yet, what God is saying is, what you see demonstrated in me is a selfless love. A love that is giving, a love that wants to have this relationship. And when I can have that kind of love, I don't have any silver plate in the drawer. I got the pure stuff. Nothing inferior. What are our churches going to look like? Our churches are going to thrive. Why? Because we've got this genuine love that says we are there for spiritual encouragement and growth. Boy, it's good to be in a church like that, isn't it? Where you know that there are people who care about you, and you know there are people who are going to be there to encourage you. It's always a sad thing when I hear some Christians say, I just don't fit in at my church. I just don't feel that, because there's something fundamentally missing there. Oh, but if you've got a church that knows the love of God, you're going to have a church, not problem-free, but a church that says, we are going to do everything we can for one another because we want everybody together in eternity. The family of God. The gospel is going to thrive. When our love is genuine, the good news of God's genuine love is going to be spoken. Kind of like the teacher. When we develop this kind, we can't help but tell other people about the gospel. What's the best personal work program? I'll tell you what it is. It's talking to your neighbor. Now, we can try all kinds of things and maybe some success, but the one that fundamentally is going to work is where you have a relationship with somebody and you let that person know you care about them. Now, why do I bring these three up? Well, I want to explore these three ideas this coming year, if the Lord so wills. That we're going to take this concept of genuine love and we're going to talk about it in our homes, and we're going to talk about it in our churches, and we're going to talk about it in our neighborhoods, and we're going to say we are dissatisfied with anything fake. And when we can do that, we're going to know the love of God. Because of this, we know the ultimate picture of genuine love. Romans 5 verse 8 says, but God shows His love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That's genuine love. And that's the love God calls on us to have for Him. And that's the kind of love God calls on us to have in every relationship that we undertake. And so I hope as we're looking at this new year, minds are fresh and thinking about things to come, that we'll make not a resolution, but we'll make a commitment that this is going to be the love that we exercise. And in that, we will reflect our Father in heaven. Thank you for your good attention this morning. That genuine love is available. Isn't it interesting? Oftentimes when we try to give someone a gift and they reject it, we'll stop trying to give it. Somebody turns us down, we'll say, no, I'm not going to try anymore. It's not God. Maybe you've heard the gospel message once this morning. Maybe this is the 500th time you've heard it. And yet here's God with His gift of genuine love, and He says, my Son died for you, and I want you to be saved. I would encourage you to take that gift this morning. That gift is the grace of God. Nothing we can do to save ourselves. Perish that thought. But coming in faith to God and standing there at the waters of baptism and understanding that God has said, kind of like His people of old, when they passed through the water, salvation's on the other side. That in that water we die with His Son, we're crucified with Him, His blood covers us. The grace of God is given, and we rise new and pure and clean with the full knowledge that we're loved of a God who's patiently waited. Is that love going to continue on? No, God said there will come times when people die unexpectedly. There's going to come one day when He's going to call all this to a halt, and we then enter the other side of this business that we're preparing for. But yet for one more day, God has said, my gift is there. Maybe today you're touched by sins of the past that you've committed. You'd like for us to pray with you, we'll be glad to do that. And the good thing is our faithful God that we've so ably sung about this morning is standing there to be faithful in that forgiveness. God's love is genuine, and I encourage you this morning to accept it. If you need to respond, you can come while we stand and sing together.